I want to start with a question that I've been sitting with for several weeks now. And I want to ask it plainly, without the kind of rhetorical packaging that usually surrounds questions of this magnitude, because I think the plain version of it is more disturbing than the packaged one. Here it is. What if the thing that is currently being described as a crisis is also simultaneously being used as a mechanism for something else entirely? I'm not asking that question as a conspiracy theorist. I want to be very clear about that. I've spent decades studying economic history, monetary systems, geopolitical transitions, the actual mechanics of how power moves through the global financial system, and the one thing that history teaches with extraordinary consistency is this. Every major financial disruption, every war, every collapse, every period of sustained economic stress has been accompanied by a restructuring of how money works. Not always immediately, not always visibly. But in the aftermath of every genuinely significant crisis, the architecture of the monetary system has been different from what it was before. Sometimes that restructuring was reactive, a genuine attempt to fix something that broke. Sometimes it was anticipatory, a change that powerful actors had been working toward and that the crisis provided the political and social conditions to implement. And sometimes the line between those two things was blurrier than the official history acknowledged. I'm not claiming to know exactly which of those is happening right now. I want to be honest about the limits of my certainty. But I am claiming that the current moment, the specific combination of geopolitical disruption, monetary system stress, and technological development we are living through, has the structural characteristics of every previous period in which the architecture of global money changed fundamentally. And I think that claim deserves very serious attention. Let me walk you through why. Most people think of monetary systems, the architecture of how money works globally, as stable background infrastructure, as the kind of thing that is simply there, like the laws of physics, unchanged and unchangeable by the actions of any particular set of actors in any particular moment. That is not what history shows. Monetary systems are, in fact, remarkably changeable. They have changed multiple times within living memory. Major structural changes in how global trade is settled, how debt is denominated, which currencies serve as reserves, which institutions sit at the center of the financial architecture. These changes don't happen gradually and smoothly. They happen in discrete jumps, usually under conditions of significant stress, usually faster than most observers expected, and usually leaving a landscape that looks very different from what came before. The transition from the gold standard to the Bretton Woods system, the transition from Bretton Woods to the petrodollar arrangement, the creation of the euro, the 2008 financial crisis, and the unprecedented monetary expansion that followed. Each of these was a genuine structural change to how money worked, not a refinement of the existing system, but a fundamental alteration of its architecture. And each of them shared certain preconditions. The first was a period of significant stress on the existing system, a moment where the current architecture was demonstrably failing to perform the function it was supposed to perform, where the gap between what the system was designed to do and what it was actually doing became too large to paper over. The second was the existence of powerful actors who had both the interest and the capacity to shape what came next. Not shadowy conspirators in a secret room. I don't believe in that model. But governments, central banks, major financial institutions, and technology platforms, all operating in their own interests, all watching the same moment of stress, and all making decisions about how to position themselves for what came after. The third was a technology or institutional innovation that made the new architecture possible in a way that the old one wasn't. Every major monetary transition has been enabled by something that didn't exist before: a new financial instrument, a new communication technology, a new institutional arrangement that made a different way of organizing money feasible. All three of those preconditions are present right now, simultaneously, in ways that I find historically striking. The existing monetary architecture is under genuine, measurable stress. The actors who would benefit from reshaping that architecture are identifiable and active, and the technological infrastructure that would make a new architecture possible exists in a way it has never existed before. That combination, in every previous instance I've studied, has preceded a genuine monetary transition. Let me be specific about what I mean when I say the existing monetary architecture is under stress, because I think the generality is less useful than the specifics. The current global monetary system is built around the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. This is not just a description of which currency most international trade is settled in. It's a description of a complete architecture, a system in which the United States can run persistent trade deficits because the world needs dollars to conduct commerce. A system in which US government debt is considered the global risk-free asset because the dollar's reserve status creates perpetual demand for it. A system in which American financial institutions sit at the center of the global payment infrastructure, giving the United States extraordinary leverage over anyone who participates in the global economy. This system has been enormously beneficial to the United States for decades. It has allowed a level of deficit spending that would have been impossible in a country without reserve currency status. It has given American policymakers a degree of financial flexibility that no other country possesses. It has made the US dollar, and by extension US financial markets, the destination of capital from around the world during periods of uncertainty. But every system of this kind carries within it the seeds of its own instability, and the instability of the dollar system is now visible in a way it wasn't a decade ago. The core vulnerability is this: the system works as long as the rest of the world continues to hold dollar assets as the preferred store of value and medium of settlement. As long as that preference holds, the United States can continue to borrow at favorable rates and run the kind of fiscal deficits that would otherwise produce a currency crisis. But that preference is not a law of nature. It is a choice that is made and remade by every central bank, every sovereign wealth fund, every major institutional actor in the global economy based on their assessment of the costs and benefits of holding dollar assets versus alternatives. And the events of the past several years, the geopolitical realignments, the weaponization of dollar-based financial infrastructure as a tool of foreign policy, the structural deterioration of America's fiscal position, have been gradually, measurably shifting that calculation for a significant portion of the world. The shift is not yet complete. The dollar is still, by a wide margin, the dominant reserve currency. The alternatives are still underdeveloped. The institutional infrastructure that would be needed to support a genuine alternative has not yet been built, but the direction of travel is clear. And the current crisis, whatever its ultimate resolution, is accelerating it. I want to spend some time on the mechanism by which crises enable monetary restructuring, because I think most people underestimate how deliberate and rapid this process can be. Here is what I've observed across multiple historical instances. When the stress on the existing system reaches a certain level, when the gap between what the architecture is supposed to do and what it is actually doing becomes politically and economically intolerable, the response is rarely a simple repair of the existing system. The response is almost always an upgrade, a restructuring that does more than fix the immediate problem. That uses the political and social conditions created by the crisis to implement changes that would have been impossible to implement without it. This is not because the people making these decisions are malevolent. It's because they are rational. When you have a system under stress, you have a political window to change things that would otherwise face enormous institutional resistance. The status quo, whatever it is always defended by the people who benefit from it. A crisis temporarily weakens those defenses. And the actors with both the interest and the capacity to shape what comes next move quickly because the window doesn't stay open indefinitely. I've watched this happen in real time, twice in my career, in ways that were transformative for the global financial system. And I'm watching the preconditions for it happen again right now. The specific shape of the next restructuring, the particular form it takes, is genuinely uncertain. I don't claim to know with precision what the new architecture will look like. Anyone who claims that kind of precision in advance of events like these is overselling their certainty. But I can describe the directional forces that I see operating and the forms they are most likely to take given the technological and institutional landscape. And those directional forces point quite clearly toward a monetary system that is more digital, more programmable, more directly connected to the individuals who participate in it, and correspondingly more capable of surveillance and control than the cash-based system it is replacing. Every major monetary transition has been enabled by a technology that made it feasible. The physical currency systems required printing technology and trusted distribution infrastructure. Bretton Woods required the institutional technology of international coordination bodies. The petrodollar system required the military and diplomatic technology to enforce it. The 2008 response required the institutional technology of central bank balance sheet expansion at unprecedented scale. The technology that makes the next transition feasible already exists. It is the combination of digital payment infrastructure, cryptographic assets, and programmable financial instruments, collectively the ability to create money that is not just a store of value and medium of exchange, but a programmable object that can carry conditions, restrictions, and capabilities embedded directly in the currency itself. This is genuinely new. No previous form of money has had this property. Physical cash is anonymous and unconditional. Whoever holds it can use it for anything, anywhere, without the permission of any institution. The existing digital banking system has some conditionality built in, but it operates through relatively slow, observable, and contestable institutional processes. Programmable digital currency, whether issued by governments as central bank digital currencies or distributed through private platforms as regulated digital assets, is categorically different. It can be programmed to expire. It can be restricted to certain categories of spending. It can be linked to behavioral conditions. It can be frozen, restricted, or modified by the issuing authority with a speed and precision that has no precedent in monetary history. I want to be very careful here about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that programmable digital currency is inherently oppressive. The same programmability that could enable financial control could also enable extraordinary improvements in how money functions, more efficient payments, better financial inclusion, more sophisticated fiscal policy transmission. The technology itself is neutral. What matters is the institutional and governance architecture within which it operates. What I am saying is that the difference between programmable and non-programmable money is one of the most significant distinctions in monetary history, and that the transition from primarily non-programmable to primarily programmable money, which is where the direction of travel is clearly pointing, represents a fundamental change in the relationship between individuals and the monetary system that most people have not yet fully grasped. And I'm saying that the current period of crisis, the stress on the existing dollar-based system, the geopolitical realignment underway, the political conditions being created by the combination of these forces, is precisely the kind of moment in which that transition is most likely to be accelerated, and in which the specific form it takes will be determined by actors with both the interest and the capacity to shape it. Let me bring this down from the level of monetary systems and geopolitical forces to the level of the individual, because I think the macro analysis is only useful insofar as it translates into something actionable for real people navigating real circumstances. Here is the most important thing I've learned about periods of genuine monetary transition. The people who preserve and grow their wealth through these transitions are almost never the people who simply held the assets that were favored by the old system. They are the people who recognized the direction of travel early enough and who made deliberate, thoughtful adjustments to their positioning, not in a panicked, all-in way, but in a measured, principled way, before the transition was fully visible to everyone. The people who were hurt most were the ones who were maximally concentrated in the assets whose value was most dependent on the continuity of the existing system, and who made no adjustments either because they didn't see the transition coming or because they saw it but couldn't bring themselves to act against the dominant narrative of stability. What does this mean practically in the current context? It means thinking carefully, more carefully than most people are currently thinking, about the difference between assets whose value is dependent on the continuation of the current monetary architecture versus assets whose value is more independent of any particular monetary architecture. It means thinking about the difference between assets that exist inside the financial system, assets that require the continued functioning of institutional intermediaries that can be frozen, restricted, or devalued by institutional decisions, versus assets that exist, at least partially outside it. It means thinking about the role of genuine stores of value, assets that have preserved purchasing power across monetary transitions in the past, and whether your current positioning gives you meaningful exposure to those properties. And it means thinking about the difference between convenience and sovereignty in how you hold and access your financial assets. The same financial system that has provided extraordinary convenience for the past several decades is the system that is currently under the most structural stress, and that will be most directly affected by whatever the next architectural transition looks like. I'm not prescribing specific actions. Every individual situation is different. Every risk tolerance is different. Every time horizon is different. What works for one person's circumstances may be entirely inappropriate for another's. But I am saying that the current moment, the specific combination of geopolitical disruption, monetary system stress, and technological transition underway, deserves a level of deliberate attention to these questions that most people are not currently giving it. I want to address directly something that I think is a genuine intellectual challenge about the current moment, and that I've wrestled with myself. When you're dealing with forces of the magnitude I've been describing, potential fundamental transitions in the global monetary system, shifts in geopolitical power that operate on decade or longer timescales, the honest answer to almost every specific predictive question is, I don't know. I don't know exactly when the transition will happen. I don't know exactly what form it will take. I don't know whether the dollar system will decline gradually over decades or face a more rapid dislocation. I don't know whether the programmable currency systems being developed will be implemented in ways that preserve meaningful individual financial freedom or in ways that severely constrain it. I don't know whether the current geopolitical disruption will accelerate these dynamics on a short timeline, or whether the resolution of the immediate crisis will provide enough breathing room to slow them down. I don't know these things, and I want to be clear about that, because I think the intellectual honesty of acknowledging uncertainty is more valuable and ultimately more useful than the false confidence of pretending to know more than I do. But here is what I do know, and what I think is actionable even under deep uncertainty. I know that the direction of travel toward a more digital, more programmable monetary system, toward a more multipolar geopolitical arrangement, toward a less unilateral dollar dominance, is real and measurable. The uncertainty is about the pace and the specific form, not about the direction. I know that the asymmetry between being positioned for this direction of travel and not being positioned for it is significant. If the transition is slower than it appears, the cost of having positioned somewhat for it is modest. If the transition is faster than most people expect, as transitions of this kind have historically often been, the cost of not having positioned for it is very large. I know that the time to make deliberate decisions about positioning is before a transition becomes undeniable to everyone, because by the time it's undeniable, the assets that would have protected you have already repriced to reflect the new reality. And I know that the most valuable thing I can do, for myself and for anyone who finds this kind of analysis useful, is to keep watching the actual evidence carefully. The physical evidence, the capital flow evidence, the institutional behavior evidence, rather than the official narrative. Because the official narrative in every previous transition I've studied has consistently lagged behind the physical reality by months and sometimes years. That gap between official narrative and physical reality is where the useful information lives, and right now that gap is very wide. Before my closing thoughts, quickly 3 things. First, I've put together a framework document that walks through how I think about protecting financial resilience during periods of genuine monetary system stress, the categories of assets that have historically preserved value across monetary transitions, and the questions I ask myself to evaluate my own positioning. It's in the description. It's completely free. I'd encourage you to work through it seriously, not as a set of instructions, but as a framework for your own thinking. Second, If you want to go deeper on this, on the macro forces shaping the monetary and geopolitical landscape, on how to build a principled framework for navigating genuine uncertainty at this scale, I've built a community of serious thinkers around exactly that kind of long-horizon analysis. People who are committed to understanding what is actually happening rather than what the dominant narrative says is happening. Details are in the description. Third, if this is the kind of honest, framework-driven conversation you want more of, subscribe. These dynamics are going to continue developing. I intend to keep tracking them carefully and sharing what I see as clearly as I can. Let me close with this. The title of this video is "They're Using This War to Replace the Dollar." I chose that framing deliberately because I think it captures something real about the current moment, not as a conspiracy claim, but as a structural observation. Wars, crises, periods of genuine systemic stress have always been used, by rational actors operating in their own interests, as windows of opportunity to restructure the systems that govern money and power. This is not a new phenomenon. It is, in fact, one of the most consistent patterns in the history of monetary systems. The dollar's dominance, extraordinary and genuinely beneficial for the United States across many decades, is a system under measurable structural stress. The technology that would make an alternative architecture feasible exists in a way it never has before. The geopolitical realignment that would create both the motivation and the opportunity for that alternative to develop is underway. None of this means the transition is certain. None of it means it will happen on any particular timeline. None of it means the end result will be bad for everyone. Transitions of this kind create losers and winners, and the outcome for any individual depends enormously on whether they understood the direction of travel and positioned accordingly. What it does mean is that the question I asked at the opening of this video, whether what is currently being described as a crisis is also simultaneously being used as a mechanism for something else, deserves a serious, honest, evidence-based answer. And when I look at the evidence honestly, the physical capital flows, the institutional behavior, the legislative and technological infrastructure being built, the historical pattern of how moments like this one have unfolded before, the answer I keep arriving at is yes. Something structural is being built or rebuilt right now, inside the noise of the current crisis, with a speed and a deliberateness that is consistent with the pattern of every previous monetary transition I've studied. Whether that something is threatening or merely transformative, or both, depends on decisions that haven't yet been made, and on whether enough people understand what's happening to have a meaningful voice in shaping those decisions. That is why I make videos like this one. Not to frighten, not to prescribe, but to give you the clearest possible picture of the forces at work, so that whatever decisions you make them with your eyes open. I'll see you in the next one.